I honestly turned my head and looked to the back as I draw my bow because I'm afraid that it's going to snap. It's that cold. And I draw this thing back, and wow, it didn't blow up. I'm good. Deer steps out. He's like 22 yards. I shoot this deer, and literally as this deer is running, you can watch the blood freezing.
Really?
He runs it's like freezing as it hits the snow. It's that cold. And this deer runs probably 35, 40 yards, stops, falls over dead. Skinning this thing, and all of a sudden he goes, well, what is that? I said, what do you mean? He goes, feel this. And so I put my hand up inside the cavity of that deer again behind the shoulder, and there's this huge mass in there. Just like a big tumor almost. He's like, well, we got to find out what this is. And I said, yeah. So we cut this thing open, and after we get the cape off stuff, so we're hacking away, and we cut this big mass out of there, cut it open, and here's my daughter's broadhead with 2.5 inches of her arrow inside this deer.
Big Buck Registry's Deer Hunting Podcast, powered by Advanced Takedown Tree Stands, episode number 214. Art Helin. 365 food sources, deep water pools, and the Deer Sanctuary. Please support our sponsors as they make this show possible. Today's show is sponsored by Advanced Takedown Tree Stands, the Horny Buck Seed Company, Covert Scouting Cameras, and Morse's Sporting Goods. Big Buck Registry is a virtual museum of hunting stories. We preserve a piece of Americana by interviewing and recording hunters about their hunts and experiences from across the country. And who knows, maybe we'll learn a thing or two along the way that'll help us take our hunt to the next level.
Hi, my name is Joe Donito. I'm one of the Adirondack trackers at adktrackers.com. You're about to listen to my favorite podcast, Big Buck Registry.
This is John Eberhart. I've been hunting out of a saddle since 1981. I'm about to listen to my favorite podcast, Big Buck Registry, Deer Hunting Podcast.
Hey everybody, this is Mia Anstein of Mac Outdoors. You are about to push play on one of my favorite podcasts, Big Buck Registry.
Welcome, fellow predators and carnivores. My name is Jay. And for Jim Keller and Dusty Phillips, welcome to another episode of the Big Buck Registry's Deer Hunting Podcast. If you're interested in this podcast or other podcasts, we could really use your help. If you're an iPhone user and you're a podcast listener and you're a deer hunter and you like this show, if you would, even if you don't use the podcast app, but you use something else like Stitcher or Blueberry or TuneIn, or you go to YouTube and watch our shows over there, would you please do something for us? Go to the podcast app and do a search for Big Buck Registry, and then hit subscribe once it comes up. And I understand iTunes does not make this easy, but leave us a review about this show. If you're a first-time user or a long-time user and you haven't done it yet, please go over there, give us a review, hopefully a 5-star. But if it's not, that's okay. We need the feedback, and it certainly helps our visibility in the iTunes charts if you do that. So if you could, please support this show by doing that. That'd be greatly appreciated. We're also running the harness program. There are 3 ways to help out in the harness program. Number 1, if you need a harness, shoot us an email. Number 2, if you have harnesses to donate, shoot us an email. Or number 3, if you don't need a harness and you don't have a harness to donate, but you want to participate in this cause where we put harnesses in the hands of the hunters that need them, you can go to bigbuckregistry.com/harness and you can donate. A little bit goes a long way. And the reason we're raising money is that we need a budget to mail these things out as they arrive. So if you could, again, bigbuckregistry.com/harness, and you can support that cause by visiting that website and donating whatever you feel you can. We're going to turn to our interview with Art Helin in just a moment, but before we do, let's turn to Jim Keller with the Deer News.
For the Big Buck Registry, this is Jim Keller with the Deer News. What you should know about EHD and how it affects deer. This story was originally featured on the deeranddeerhunting.com website and was written by Alan Clemens. What do you know about epizootic hemorrhage disease? It's one of several diseases that hunters hear about but often don't know much about. Here's a description of EHD from the Michigan DNR. Epizootic hemorrhagic disease is an acute, infectious, often fatal viral disease of some wild ruminants. This malady, characterized by extensive hemorrhage, has been responsible for significant epizootics in deer in the northern United States and southern Canada. And just a note, I looked up what epizootic means. It means an epidemic among animals of a single kind within a particular region. A similar hemorrhagic disease called blue tongue also occurs throughout the U.S. and Canada. The two diseases are antigenetically different. EHD is starting to hit in several states pretty hard, including eastern Tennessee and eastern Kentucky. Wildlife officials in other states are on the lookout as the usual 5 to 6 year cycle of midges combined with weather patterns of drought and or heavy rain seem to be in play this summer. The disease is contracted almost always around water sources by biting midges, and then infected deer usually return to or find a water source as the disease and dehydration sets in. The Michigan DNR has a good video clip about EHD hosted by Tim Hart and pathologist Tom Cooley. Solid info like this can help you know more about the disease. DNR seeks input on January deer hunt. This story was originally featured on the Post Bulletin website. The Minnesota Department of Natural Resources is seeking input on a proposed late-season antlerless-only deer hunt in southeastern Minnesota. The DNR will host 2 public input meetings about the proposed hunt, potential dates, bag limits, and other restrictions. The first meeting will be held from 7 to 8:30 p.m. Wednesday in the Houston Elementary School Gymnasium at 310 South Sherman Street in Houston. The second meeting will be 7 to 8:30 p.m. Thursday in the DNR Central Office Lobby, 500 Lafayette Road in St. Paul. Online input will be taken from August 28th through September 11th. The late-season antlerless-only hunt is proposed for January 6th to January 14th, concurrent with a late chronic wasting disease hunt in deer permit area number 603. The deer permit areas that are proposed to be included are 346, 348, and 349 in the far southeastern corner of the state. Populations in the 3 permit areas have been over the population goal set in 2014 for multiple seasons. This proposed additional late antlerless-only season hunt would facilitate moving populations toward established goals and provide additional hunting opportunities. DNR officials want to know how people feel about some of the specifics of the proposed hunt, including hunt dates, whether the hunt be limited to private land only, whether a bag limit of 5 deer is appropriate, and whether the hunt occur at all. Moose hunting in 2 North Dakota wild refuges would be a first. This story was originally featured on the Outdoor News website. Federal officials are proposing allowing moose hunting for the first time in the Des Lacs and Upper Souris wildlife refuges in northern North Dakota. The proposal also calls for the Upper Souris Refuge to have turkey hunting for the first time. The 2 refuges already are open to upland game and big game hunting, and Upper Souris is also open to fishing. The proposed expansion of outdoor opportunities is through an effort by Interior Secretary Ryan Zinke and the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service to increase access to hunting and fishing on public lands and waters across the country. The public has about a month to comment on the proposal. Tiffany Lukoski opens up about her battle with cancer. This story was originally featured on the Wide Open Spaces website and was posted by Reed Vanderveen. It was shortly after delivering their second child that Tiffany Lukoski got some unwelcome news. She had been diagnosed with carcinosarcoma, a rare but treatable form of uterine cancer. Hosts of the popular hunting show Crush with Lee and Tiffany, the Lukoskis approach cancer in much the same way they do with their hunting: patience, hard work, and humility. What may be the most interesting portion of the story, however, was Lee's response to the news. Upon receiving the news, Tiffany writes in a recent Instagram post, "Lee said to me, 'Tiffany, are you a caribou or an elk?' After receiving a puzzled look, Lee continued, 'You can hit a caribou in the leg, and he will lay down with no will to live. Or you can hit an elk perfectly behind the shoulder and double lung him, and he will run for miles. They are a strong animal with an amazing will to live. So which are you, a caribou or an elk?'" That concludes this week's edition of the Big Buck Registry's Deer News. For links to the stories featured this week, please check our show notes at www.bigbuckregistry.com. If you have any ideas for future topics or have any questions about any of these topics, please email me at jim@bigbuckregistry.com. For the Big Buck Registry, this is Jim Keller with the Deer News.
This week's guest is Art Helin. Art Helin spends a lot of time in the deer woods. He is a student. Art says that it's not unusual for him to spend 150 days a year in the field, guiding, scouting, hunting, but most of all learning. You'll often find Art delivering seminars for many different aspects of deer hunting, where he shares stories that he draws from his own experiences, both successes and failures. Art uses lots of today's technology, including online topographical and aerial maps and game cameras. He loves a good food plot, timberland management, pond projects, and smart foresters. Art conducts his own deer habitat consultations and will share his knowledge with any hunter that will listen. So without further ado, here is Art Helin. Art Helin, welcome to the Big Buck Registry's Deer Hunting Podcast. How are you, my friend?
I'm good. How are you, Jay?
I'm doing good. Where are you at right now?
Sitting in my office in Dodgeville, Wisconsin.
Dodgeville, Wisconsin. What's going on in Dodgeville these days?
Oh, not a lot. It's for August, it's actually kind of nice. The weather is quite cool and not humid, which is odd for around here at this time of year, but not a lot. Just getting, we're counting down the days until deer season starts, which will be mid-September this year for bow season, and so just trying to get some things ready around here for deer season, and I've got some photo work and a trip I'm taking with my wife here in a couple weeks, and so got to try to get a few things ready for that. Other than that, it's just work. That's all that's happening in Dodgeville.
Gotcha. All right. Isn't it funny how we as hunters count down the days to opening day of deer season?
Yeah, you know what? I don't know, however, though, that deer season, if you're, into management and into, land management like I am, that if it ever ends, it's a 365-day thing. But as far as counting to opening day, yeah, as soon as that day closes, we know exactly, we're already looking at regs for the following year and what states open where and when and what day, and start making plans, the day that season ends. Here it's usually the first part of January, and then it's all of a sudden, okay, now let's get through this, and then deer season starts again here in September. So what do we got to do?
Right.
And,
right.
It's, I don't know, I guess we're a whole different breed, as they would say.
Right. I completely agree with you. The conceptual part of hunting, the scouting, the preparation, the thoughts, they never stop. It's all year long. It's only that part where they give you permission to go hunt the species in which you are hoping to encounter. That's the countdown, right?
Right. And it's, like I said, it's amazing anymore because there's so many states that start at different times. You get into, the southern states or some of the western states, and, they're going to start here at the end of the month here already, or even before the end of the month. And then,
yeah.
If you're into the southwest, into the Coos deer and some of those, they've already started or starting next week already. So,
right.
Elk season starts. So, yeah, it's different, but whitetails, that is the most sought after big game animal. And, that countdown seems to be the countdown for, the majority of people, that when it closes, we already know. And, you'll start seeing the memes already out there on, different social media sites and stuff the day after. Don't feel so bad, hunting just closed, only 196 days till opening.
Yeah,
so,
true hunters never stop thinking about it, really.
That's true. That is true.
Right.
So,
all right, tell us about yourself. Where are you from? Where did you grow up? And what was life like for you as a child?
Well, I grew up here in Dodgeville.
Okay.
And, things were good. My mom worked at a company here called Land's End, which is still around, big clothing company.
Sure, yeah, huge clothing company. Yep.
Yes. And my dad was self-employed in real estate and real estate appraisals.
Yeah.
So as I grew up, I was really into sports and as a young kid, but I really liked the outdoors. And my dad, he didn't do a lot of hunting. He hunted some, but he really wasn't into it like I am. And so my grandmother saw this passion in me, and so she would pick me up. I grew up going to a Catholic school, and so she would pick me up if I didn't have sports or something and take me out to, we have a park, Governor Dodge State Park. It's a 5,000-acre-plus state park here, right outside town. Beautiful rolling hills filled with wildlife. And she would take me out there, and she would park her car and read a book, and let me go down, towards the beach or the lake or wherever and watch birds or watch deer, or, she would just drive me all over the countryside and saw that passion. And so she wanted me to enjoy the outdoors. And she was never really a hunter. My grandma wasn't, or my grandfather, but she knew that's what I wanted to do, so she was not going to discourage me and help me get into that. And she actually bought me my first camera, 35 millimeter camera, when I was 10 years old to start taking pictures of these animals and do different things with that. And from there, it just kind of grew. And so my dad got into hunting a little more as he saw my passion. Well, back then it was 12 years old before you could hunt here in the state of Wisconsin. And so once I turned 12, I'd taken hunter safety, and my dad started, getting me to hunt. Actually, when I was 11 years old, we started going to the ranges and shooting. And another friend of ours, Paul Juleson, who happened to be a Vietnam vet who was a friend of my dad's, came home from Vietnam on the day that I was born. And so him and I always kind of talk about that, because I don't know if that's what the bond was, because he got home and, found out that his friend, my dad, had just had their son, which would have been me, obviously. And so that kind of hit things off, and he was really into bow hunting. And so he said, I'd love to teach Art how to bow hunt, since he didn't have any sons at that time of his own that wanted to hunt. And so he kind of took me under his wing as far as bow hunting. So I started, right away at the age of 11 years old, when he got me into it, of shooting bow. Actually, it was probably when I was 10, started to shoot bow before rifles. And my first bow was an old Browning Bantam. I still remember that bow because we bought it at a garage sale from the guy for like $25. And and it worked great for a few years, but it was one of those, it was all just one piece wood riser, limbs, everything was one piece, and it ended up cracking when I was 12 years old, I believe it was. And then, then we started moving up the chain as far as technology and stuff over the years. And so that kind of drove my passion into that. And I really got into bow hunting and gun hunting. Well, then I was also, because of my sports and, high school, I hunted as much as I possibly could. But, I enjoyed the football too, and was into powerlifting and different things. So then when I went into college, I went to college to play football, went in for advertisement marketing and then business management with a minor in art and photography.
Wow.
So,
okay.
Yeah. And so, I kind of split the art because I liked the arts end of it, but I think a lot of that was driven due to the photography work, and, they play hand in hand. And so it was neat to see how they actually did that. And so anyway, I went in and wanted to, play football while I was there. So I played football at University of Wisconsin, River Falls. And then after I got out of school, then I just kind of really got back into hunting and did a lot of tournament shooting, and was picked up at that time by a bow company. And from there, it just kind of snowballed. Then it started dealing more with some of the hunting companies, and just slowly turned it into a business due to the passion of hunting and photography and just the outdoors in general. And then we worked with my wife and I, actually, one day on a plane. I was heading out to do seminars in Michigan on deer vocalizations, and Ralph Cianciarulo was sitting on the plane next to me. And this is, you got to remember, before Ralph Cianciarulo was Ralph Cianciarulo. He was, kind of in the same boat. He didn't have a TV show yet or anything else. Well, him and I started talking on the plane back and forth. He was actually going to the same cabell as I was to do seminars on elk hunting. And so Ralph and I talked, and this would have been in 1998. And then in the end of 98, beginning of 99, my wife and I started filming with them for their, at the time, VHS series. It didn't even have a DVD
Right,
series.
Right, back in the day of the tape.
Yeah. And so we started filming with them, and then in 2000 they started their TV show, and we were with them for approximately 9-10 years overall. And things just kind of led us apart. He had certain sponsors that, he had obviously, as the host of the show, and him and Vicky, it was their show, and they're incredible, super people. They had their things to do, and I had my things to do for my sponsors. And so we just kind of parted ways on good terms. We're still very good friends. Mm-hmm. And so I kind of went my way and just kept developing my end of, the hunting industry per se, which has a lot of different entities in it, which is my, then developed into my Art Helin Outdoors LLC as well.
Gotcha.
Ultimately became.
Gotcha. Fascinating story. So just a random plane ride.
Yep. Just, and, I was in the industry before that, but would I be where I am today without the extra exposure that show had given me, or that, being part of that would have been, I don't know. You're put in places for reasons, and was that the reason?
Right.
I'm not sure. I really can't explain that, but I was, like I said, I'd been in the industry since 1993, so 5 or 6 years, prior. But that just kind of helped keep things rolling and keep the momentum going forward as far as things went. So,
Gotcha.
And so after that, now, like I said, we've really snowballed, my wife and I, into different things. Under that umbrella, we have a lot of different things. As they say, jack of all trades and master of none. That's kind of where I'm at underneath that, because
Right.
I kind of get that question all the time. So what exactly is, Art Helin Outdoors? What exactly do you do? And so I have to explain that a lot, which is a little different, because it's different than what a lot of people within the industry do. They've either got one thing that they do as far as the filming, or as far, for the TV shows, or they're a cameraman, or they have a habitat thing, or there's just one thing. Myself, I've always learned, and I guess I learned this a long time ago, is to diversify. And
Right.
so I've kind of diversified a lot of different things to hopefully help more people out. I like to educate. That's what I like to do. I'm as a business manager, I'd really like to educate people, and when they come back to me and say, hey, I did this, I learned at one of your seminars, it worked, I shot the best deer I've ever shot, or this happened, I was successful with this, that to me is priceless.
Right. Very cool. Do you remember the first gun you ever shot as a kid?
The first gun?
Yeah.
Would have been a little bolt-action 22.
22 is the most common answer. It's
Yeah.
other than BB gun, but then we don't count that. Well, we do, but we don't. Very cool.
So yeah, it would have been my grandfather's, and I actually still have that gun, and I've kept that. And then the second gun that I ever shot was my grandpa had a 16 gauge pump.
Yep.
And I still have that gun. And then here's a really interesting one for you. So the first deer rifle I ever used was a 32 Special, Winchester Special, lever action.
Really?
Okay? Yes. Now, the story behind this gun, my grandfather used to own a Ford Mercury dealership in Dodgeville here.
Yep.
And one day in the late 60s, it would have been, a gentleman came walking into the shop with a backpack on and this 32 Special tied to it. He came in and he started talking to my grandfather. This is a story my grandfather had told me now.
Sure.
And said that, this gentleman started talking to me, and he said, I want to test drive that car out there. My grandfather's like, well, which one? And he says, well, the old one down there at the end of the lot. And my grandpa's like, well, he said, that car is just, is a piece of junk, $100 car, which was even inexpensive at that time. And he says that, it about ran. That was about all it really did. And he says, but I don't know you. I don't know where you come from, anything else. He says, I just need a car to get from here to there. It looks like an inexpensive car. I'll tell you what, I will leave this gun here, he says, as collateral for me taking that car, to go out and test drive that car.
Right.
Grandpa says, all right, have at it. He said, he says, as soon as he jumped in that car, he said, in the way I saw him organizing things, he says, I knew I was never going to see that car again. He says, he took off with that car. He says, I never saw it again. He said, and that's where this rifle came from.
That's a good story.
And I still have that rifle. And we actually still use that. And actually next year my wife wants to go out mountain lion hunting, and that is the rifle that she will use on that hunt.
Wow. What a cool story. That's nuts. I wonder whatever happened to the car. I
have no idea. The guy probably got it as far as he could go until it broke down, and then took off from there. Grandpa said I never called it in or anything else because I knew I was never getting it back.
Right.
And he said the rifle, he says I actually needed a rifle, and the rifle was probably worth more than that car was. So he says I didn't really care.
He made out okay. Yeah, he knew he was on the upper end on that one. That's funny.
Yeah. He did. So it was kind of neat, So that would have been the first gun as far as deer rifle or larger caliber gun that I'd ever shot.
Gotcha. Let's talk a little bit about your habitat consultation work that you do, Art. It's kind of a interesting concept. Not a lot of guys do it, and it's something that I think is very sought after. Like, people are looking for information on this kind of thing, and to know that you do it professionally is kind of interesting.
Yeah, and it's something that is growing, and more people as they're getting more into mature deer. I do a lot of seminars all over the country on deer vocalizations, habitat management, mature deer, getting deer to maturity, age versus antlers, because there's a lot of things that now people are looking at saying, well, that 150-inch deer is only a 3-year-old deer. He's got potential to be a giant. But that 6-year-old's only a 140-inch deer. Let's shoot that 140-inch deer and let that 150-inch deer walk, which is tough to do, but, that is the new trend. That is what I'm seeing out there as far as people, and so they're wanting to know, how do we keep these deer on our property? How do we, keep these mature deer from running off and getting shot, or these 3-year-olds? And, the answer is, I don't care how big a piece of property you have, you've always got a few deer that are going to leave. It's just going to happen. Right. If somebody tells you it's not, well, then you've got a high fence, because it's in their DNA. Deer have to go and they have to check things out. Right. However, as deer get older, their home ranges start getting smaller. And if you give them, I truly believe, and I've seen it, that if you give them the best food, water, cover, and sanctuaries, you can do a lot, even with just, a small piece of land, on a 40-acre piece, on a 20-acre piece, up to, a 2,000-acre piece. And how it all started, my dad and I, 20-some years ago, bought a 40-acre piece of property. And we really wanted to get into deer management.
Yeah.
One of my neighbors did too. And so as I'm looking at this, I'm like, we just can't keep the deer here. And it was too open. Things just weren't happening. So I started talking to some foresters, because we enrolled it into a managed forest law program. So I started talking to local foresters, and what do you do? How do you do this? And so then I started taking some classes on this forestry and sitting through and talking to you. So then I'd walk this and like, all right, so, I'm reading this on, how to stump cut. I'm reading this on how to hinge cut. I'm reading this on, what trees that, box elders, things that we just need to kill and get out of here after we cut them. And so all of a sudden things started progressing, and I started talking to these guys. Said, all right, let's go out and look at my piece. What can we do out here to do this? Well, once I got the foresters out there, we started looking. I'm like, well, I read this about hinge cutting. You say that to a forester, and they about come unglued.
Why is that?
Absolutely. They just hate any type of hinge cutting.
That's interesting because it's such a technique that deer hunters love, and I had no idea the foresters were against that.
Yeah, and it is, and does it work? Yes, it works, but, I'm not huge on hinge cutting either, just because of what I've learned through all the foresters, and I've learned that there's other techniques that you can do that are just as effective, if not more effective, on certain areas. Hinge cutting, if you have a mix, can be great because hinge cutting truly is really good to direct deer, to make deer go in certain ways, where I can get just as good of bedding areas or better bedding by stump cutting certain trees and killing off certain trees than I can by hinge cutting, especially in the northern areas, because once that snow gets in there, you want that tree hinge cut to live for a few years. Well, what happens is that snow gets in there, it starts busting up that tree, it breaks. Well, in the meantime, for the couple years that it lived, the sunlight didn't get down underneath those leaves, so that stuff's dead. So once those trees finally drop, now it takes longer for new regeneration in that area. And so all you've got is kind of a lot of brush piles, but they're good for rabbits because there's nothing green in there for things to hide in.
Gotcha.
So, but again, to use that in certain areas, it works great. So as I worked with all these foresters and started looking at that, we implemented, both things on our property, and I started watching this and started learning that, okay, we need to do this in phases, because if we do it all at once, everything comes back at the same time. So if we want to create certain bedding areas here so we can hunt, the wind right for that bedding area, we can't do the whole property. We have to create that bedding area and then figure out, okay, this is where, maybe there's a food source there. So now we have to create a bedding area off that food source. Now we can figure out where our stands are going to go, and then we can go in there and develop water sources. And so as I start looking at this plan, then I start looking, okay, now who knows what about water? So I started working with aquatic biologists because I'm like, okay, I have kiddie pools out, I have different, little pools out, and they work great for the first 2 years, and all of a sudden images on trail cameras start dwindling. I'm like, what is going on here? So I start talking to these biologists. So we started running some water tests and different things and finding out that because they're so shallow and if you don't do certain things, they fill up and they get a lot of bacteria in them.
Okay.
So once they get all this bacteria, then the deer just don't come to them as often. So you have to either, they get frail. Up here, they'll break, different things. So I said, all right, so then what do we do? How do you, how do you overcome this? Well, then they found out that, okay, you either can use bentonite or there's certain new within the last 10, 12 years, they've come out with new pond liners that deer and elk don't poke through. And as you get these, they aren't rubber. It's a different type of material. Then you put a mat on top of that, which holds the dirt in place, because then you'll put dirt on top of those, just like in bentonite.
Yep.
And that will actually seal that and hold it. But it will also hold in those natural minerals that are in water. But if you make that over 3.5 feet deep, 3.5 feet deep and deeper, which for most of the wildlife ponds, I have 3.5 to 4.5 feet deep.
Okay.
The reason is you need that, especially up north here, to hit a certain degree. When that bottom of that pond hits 39 degrees, it turns over just like a lake.
Really? Fascinating.
Yeah.
And that's 3.5 feet deep.
Right. It's got to be over 3.5 feet deep.
Okay.
And so to get the difference in surface temperature to bottom temperature.
Right.
And so in the spring, when it hits that, it's just like a lake. So if you're a big fisherman, people are like, oh, the lake's turning over. You get all that
Sure.
green slime on top. That's what happened. That water mixes, and the bottom of the lake is at that 39 degrees and starts warming past that 39 degrees. Once it warms past that 39 degrees, it starts pulling all that off the bottom and turning it over to the top. And so when it does that, it pulls all those natural minerals out of the soil, all the plant proteins that have sat in the bottom all winter, and turns that over to the top. And that's what gives that green, slimy whatever on top for like a month.
Gotcha.
And if you look at your photos, that's when you see a lot of deer in there. You see it because, and I don't know, and I've asked the biologists, and a lot of them don't know. And I don't know, it's just a theory that everybody has, is that If you look at the timing of that, the timing is when the turkeys have their poults, it's when the fawns are born, and it's when your bucks are starting to develop antlers. So that's when they need all that extra protein and mineral. And so is that Mother Nature's way of pulling that off the bottom and bringing that to them for easier access? I don't know. It's just a theory that people have come up with. And, so once that happens, it brings that up there, and so you're giving them better water. And as the rains and stuff come in, it actually cleans that out, makes the water better. Because it stays deep enough, it stays cool enough that you're not going to get that bacteria and stuff growing in there, like you will in your shallow ponds. So I worked with them and figured out, okay, how do you do this? Where do you build them? And, of course, we found out, if you've got ridges on your property, try to get them as high on your ridges, just off the top so that rainwater fills them up. Because in most states, damming a creek, opening up a spring, anything like that is illegal without DNR permits.
Right. That makes
sense. However, pretty much every state that I've ever worked in, as long as you are just collecting rainwater, it's legal.
Okay.
So, you're not going to go in and dam these other areas up. The other thing is you bring these higher on the hills. Again, you can place those, say, okay, here's my food, here's my bedding, now here's my water. I'm giving them everything there as a one-stop shop. Now I can place my tree stands for the winds.
Right.
So now it's easier to hunt, it's easier to access getting to these places than it would be, say, down in a creek. Plus, your wind is going to be more steady on the tops of those hills. If you do down in a bottom, usually there's a lot of wind swirl, creeks, ponds down in bottoms. Yes, they fill up faster, but they're a lot more difficult to hunt and be successful over. So, that was part 2 into the land management that I learned, is bringing that in. So after that, then I'm like, okay, now what do we have to do? Because we're definitely keeping more deer here because we've got some of the best bedding we have with all the TSI work, which is timber stand improvement.
Yep.
So now we've got great improvement on that. However, what about food? So the mentality that I've learned over the years that people have is we think too much like normal farmers, like crop farmers. And here, we come from areas, Iowa, Wisconsin, Illinois, Ohio, Kansas. You get here in the Midwest and it's all about cornfields and bean fields and, the different ag sources. Well, what happens is if we think like that and you look at the timeline, so you've got alfalfa, which is great. That starts right away in the spring. However, you go in there and it dies off or becomes, dormant in the fall.
Right.
Your beans, your corn, the leaves start drying up and falling off your beans usually about the first week or 2 weeks prior to, in September, so just prior to bow season opener. Your corn, all the silk, everything dries up. Your corn leaves the milky stage, starts getting hard. So all of a sudden that happens within just before bow season opens up in most states. So now all of a sudden you've had great food source up until then. Now what do you have? You have to wait again until December for them to be back in there for food sources. So I started looking at things different and talking to some different agronomists and started working with a gentleman out of Madison here. And I started saying, well, I want to figure out how to do 365-day food plots. I said, I want those deer so now if I give them everything, they can't leave.
Right.
Are they still going to? Yes, like I said, there's always a few, but the majority I want to stay. So I started looking at it saying, all right, what right away in the spring? He's like, well, you got clovers, you have alfalfas, you have chicories, great spring planting stuff. It's right there in the spring where you plant it. It's good for 4 or 5 years. It's always going to be ready right away in the spring.
Yeah.
That stays until November up here when, things start freezing and they become dormant. Down south, it's a little different story. But those plans are completely different written. I've been there. Can I do them? Yes, but I usually leave those areas for people in the same business down there because they know that. I do a lot of stuff in the Midwest. And so then, we looked at it and I said, now what? I said, well, what about beans? Because they like beans and they like leaves. So all right, well, let's figure out, we'll put beans, but let's figure out how to plant them so I can come back in August or July, the end of July, first part of August in these areas, and overseed that or replant on top of all the beans or even in the corn and put in my early fall and winter food sources.
Gotcha.
So now all of a sudden I'm planting in between everything, and now I've got brassicas and turnips and radishes and all these different winter wheats all through the middle of this. So now all of a sudden as the leaves start falling off your beans or the corn starts to get hard, now you have all this lush green that's up in between everything. So now they don't have to, now they've got all the clovers, now they've got all the brassicas, now they've got all the late fall stuff, and now in the winter they'll have all those bulbs, plus they have what's left over for beans and corn. Hopefully there's enough there that will get them right up until spring. Then all of a sudden as the thaw starts, all your clovers and alfalfas, chicories, they all start turning green, coming back right away. Now you have that 365-day food source.
Gotcha. Okay.
So now all of a sudden I'm like, all right, so now we're starting to figure out this food, but I've still got these mature deer. So I've got a lot of deer running around, but my mature deer are still there only to a certain time, and then they leave. I'm like, what is going on? So as I start watching these and documenting and figuring things out, I'm like, all right, if I put pressure on these old deer, 1, 2, and 3-year-old deer, they don't care. 4, 5, 6-year-old deer, I pressure them, they're gone.
Okay.
And
all right,
as they take off, they may only go 40 acres away, or they aren't going to go 20 miles. You know, they may go a little ways, but that might be because that next door neighbor only rifle hunts and he has no pressure on his property. He's that same neighbor that all of a sudden you walk in there opening day of rifle season, he shows up and goes, hey, you ever seen this deer before? I've never seen him. First time I walked in my woods and there he was and I shot him. And you're like, ugh. You know, it's because you were pressuring it. So then all of a sudden say, okay, where do I develop areas of sanctuary that I can stay out of? Once I get these done, after, and I always say mid-July to the end of July, you're done. Don't go in there anymore, because that's when your bucks, all your mature bucks and your bucks are starting to slowly break out of their bachelor groups.
Yep.
And those older deer are trying to figure out where their home ranges are. If you're in their home range pushing them, they're going to find that security. And so, you know, as they do that, you have to figure out where you can get to on these properties. And so as a land manager, that's what I do. I come in and I look at people's properties. I walk through that property with the owner, and then I get back and I start looking at wind directions. I start looking at different elevations on those properties, how things lay, and then say, okay, now here's the plan we're going to develop. This is where we're going to do bedding. This is where we're going to do food. This is where we're going to do water. This is where your sanctuaries are going to be. And this is how you're going to access these stands on these winds. And that's what, you know, they hire us to do as a land manager, because some people just don't see it or don't have the time to do it, or just bought a new piece where, you know, myself, it took truly working with everybody, you know, 10 to 15 years before I'm like, okay, and that was going in and setting up a bunch of other people's properties that were friends and people I knew, and, you know, is it just working on mine or does it work on everybody's? So I'm taking all this knowledge from everybody, you know, the true aquatic biologists, the foresters, you know, looking at the agronomists and all these different people, putting all those pieces of the puzzle together myself, and then saying, okay, yeah, this is working on mine, there's everything else. So then about 6 years ago, I had enough behind me saying, yeah, this is truly working, so I'm going to start a business doing this. And that's when I started doing that. You know, so it took me 15 to 18 years of doing research and making sure everything was actually working before I actually said, yeah, let's do this and make this part of, you know, the Art Helin Outdoors LLC as far as consultation work. So, yeah.
What did you do? Let's kind of go back just a sec on the canopy and the tree management. What did you do there as far as, and I don't know what your property was like when you first got there, how much thought goes into that before you get to the food stuff?
There's quite a bit. actually, when you walk through, because you want to make sure that you're not taking out the wrong trees, or that, when you walk through a piece of property, you have to look at it and say, man, there's no undergrowth here, but there's certain areas where those deer like that in the summer because it's cooler in those areas. There's not so much brush around them. So they have to have some of that too. There has to be a mix. We also started implementing, 2 years ago, I started working with a lot of guys that do prescribed burns.
Yep.
And so we're just starting to implement all that to open some areas, get some more natural vegetation and things in certain areas of the properties. But, the trees, so all depends on where you're at in the country and what types of trees you have. Because, here we have a lot of white oaks, red oaks. We have a lot of elm trees, box elders, walnut trees, hickory trees, shagbark hickory, black oak. So we have a big variety, a mix of different trees. So, box elders, elm trees, they're not, I don't want to say, they're a weed tree, as we call them.
Right.
And as far as I'm concerned, walnut tree is really a weed tree too. However, a walnut is, a desired tree for the logging industry for money-wise. So that is why I think that you see a lot of walnut trees still around, because if you get big walnut areas, that acid that comes out of those walnuts, it's really hard to grow anything underneath those, even years after you remove those trees.
Oh, no kidding. Okay. Interesting.
Yeah. And so as you walk through, you look through it and you say, okay, this area is really good young oak regeneration. And here we love to have a lot of oaks. So it's really good oak regeneration. However, right next to it, there might be a whole bunch of elm trees. Well, elm is a very dense wood and very heavy. And so I don't want to go in there, and this is where all of a sudden you start looking at things and go, okay, how do you want to develop this? Because you should really then start girdling all these elm trees, which girdle, you just go, you make two cuts, about a foot to a foot and a half off the ground, about 6 inches apart, and you go about 2 inches to 3 inches into the tree all the way around, and it cuts that, and it cuts off the supply to that tree, and it ends up dying over time. Well, what happens, because it's so dense, if you cut that down and it falls the wrong way, it's going to fall on all those small oak trees and break them.
Gotcha.
And then you have nothing. Where when you do this with elm trees, what happens is they stay standing, they die, they still let the sunlight get to the oak regeneration with better sunlight, so it shoots those up faster. The elm tree dies, stays standing for 5 or 6 years, dries out completely, while 5 or 6 years of growth happens on that oak tree or your desired trees before that falls over. So that way it doesn't hurt those trees as much for your desired trees. So there's a lot of thought process that goes into it and where you're going to do it. Do I need to do it on, a south-facing slope, on a north-facing? What types of bedding areas am I looking for? How young are the trees? How old are the trees? So there is a lot of process that goes into it. A lot of times I'll actually get a forester there or have them work with their local forester. And because there's so many grants and so many programs and things out there for landowners already with the local foresters. And most of them, everybody thinks, it's a forester. I don't want him on my property. Foresters, they don't really care what's on your property except for trees. They're looking up 90% of the time when they walk through your woods because right. they are, they're as passionate. True foresters are as passionate about, and not loggers. I'm not going to say anything bad about loggers because I work with a lot of loggers, and there's very good loggers out there. But foresters and loggers are two different, animals.
Correct.
So
right.
You need to find that forester because they walk through and they're looking up all the time at trees. They're as passionate about those trees as we are about big deer.
Right. Right.
And so you talk to them and say, hey, this is what I want to do to my property. I want to create, some timber stand improvement for, better habitat for birds, for deer, for turkeys, for wildlife in general. They'll be like, okay, this is what we have to do. If you say, hey, I really want the best money trees I can get for down the road for logging, they'll say, okay, this is what we need to do.
Right.
And they're great that way. And the they're definitely the best way, especially, you get into different states because they know what their desired stuff is more than here. And so a lot of times I'll go out, draw up an entire plan, and if they want me to do some of that, it's great. But usually when I draw up a plan, I say, all right, this is where your bedding's going to be. So these are the areas that you need to get your forester in and concentrate on. These areas here where you're going to do your ponds. Can I dig those? Sure, I can. But a lot of times the clients that I work with, they want to do 90 to 95% of the work themselves. They want to do the chainsawing. They want to build the food plots. They want to build the ponds. They just don't know where to start. And so you have to give them that direction because they want to do it so they feel that they have been the majority of growing that big deer, which they are because they're the ones doing all the work. I just gave them a direction to go in and said, this is the plan that I would follow if you truly want to keep deer here and, make your property that much better and desirable for animals. This is what you need to do. Can I do this and stay here and take 2 weeks and do all the work for you or whatever? Yeah, but it's going to cost this much. And they're like, well, I'd rather buy a chainsaw and do it myself.
Right.
And, okay, great, because that's what I'm hoping to hear.
Right.
And not that I don't want to do the work. I have no problems doing the work, but I want that because it's the way I learn too. And the more work that they do themselves and follow that plan, the better they'll get at what they need to do. They'll become better hunters too, because then they'll be able to visualize, okay, now I know why I'm doing this. Now I know why this is here. This is how these deer are going to travel. This is what's going to happen, instead of just going out and sitting in a tree stand.
Right.
Now they can figure that out. And again, it's right back to educating, like my seminars and everything else. I love to educate. And so when you get out there, that's why I love to do that with those people and say, hey, you know what? I'd really like to see you do this yourself. Because not only am I educating you on this point of it, but you're going to educate yourself beyond this.
Right. Gotcha.
So,
very cool.
Yeah. So that's kind of land management and how I'm doing that kind of in a nutshell. And,
okay.
So that's one part of the division of the business. The other parts, I do a lot of seminar work, again, for a lot of the deer classics, for like the Kansas Big Buck Classic. I did that last year, the Iowa Deer Classic,
yep.
A lot of the deer and turkey expos, Michigan, Wisconsin, Illinois, Ohio. And a lot of those I'll do either management seminars or I'll get into deer vocalizations and turkey hunting stuff. There's just a lot of different things that I can cover because, again, I've been self-employed. I actually then, when I got out of college, went to work with my dad as, working in the real estate and appraisal business.
Right.
I still help my dad on and off with the appraisal business when things get slow in this business, which aren't very often anymore.
Right.
Because truly with the land management, in this area, well, in most areas, usually from January 1 through the first week of April is the best time, and when I usually book the most to go look at properties, because right now there's so many leaves, so many things you can't see. And so it's not justified for me. Some people will do it, but for me, I don't think I'm doing them just by showing up and saying, I really can't see everything that I need to see, but this is where I think I would do this, where, you go in December, January, different things like, January, February, March, now you can see everything. There's no leaves on the trees. The underbrush is pretty much knocked down because of snow. I can see all the little nooks and crannies and where ponds should go and food and the different types of trees. You're not going to miss much. Where now you're going to miss a lot of stuff out there.
Gotcha. So now that you've got your water source sorted out, you've got your canopy and tree plan in place, you've got your food source developed for various food plots and things like that, and you've given them sanctuary. Where does the hunter fit in? How does the hunter hunt the whitetail from there? How do you go about it?
Well, and now, that's like myself. I'm fortunate again because, as I was stating, helping my dad in his business and stuff. So I get to hunt every day of the year, no matter what. Even if I shoot something, I'm still out there. Why? Because I want to learn. I want to know what that deer is doing in all weathers, rain, snow, winds. What is that deer doing so I can educate those people? So it brings that hunter in where he needs to learn. Now he's going to understand those deer because hopefully they're there more often, which they should be if he's done it right. So now early season, there's different early season tactics. I want to hunt, my food sources early in the year. The deer are concentrating on that, and as things start to progress through into that first part of October, their food sources change a little bit, maybe to those acorn flats. So you're going to look at that. Now, all of a sudden, because you have this developed, you should know where bedding areas are, where your food source. So now you can start figuring out where all your pinch points are and where your funnels are. So now that's where you want to move to once you get into that late October. Move off those food sources. Too many people keep concentrating on your food sources because they see so many does and all that buck will show up here. And they will. If you want to hunt those right away in the morning or late in the afternoon, that's great. But the problem is a lot of times you're going to end up blowing deer off of those areas.
Right.
During the rut, sometimes you can get away with it. Early season, not so much. One tactic that I like to use if I'm sitting food sources early season is I will take coyote calls with me. I'll take coyote howler with me.
Really?
That way, as soon as it gets dark, if I have a lot of deer still sitting on that field and I'm sitting a field edge, I don't want to get out and educate those deer and blow them out of there. So I wait until it's dark. As soon as it's getting dark and all I can see is anything through my binoculars moving a little bit, then I will take that coyote howler and I'll start howling because we got a lot of coyotes around here. As soon as I see those flags go up and those deer kind of taking off, once they take off, I'll drop to the base of my tree. I'll get everything out, drop to the base of my tree. I'll coyote call again, and then that's when I sneak out my exit route. That way, if they see me or hear me, they just think it's a coyote.
Gotcha.
And I've watched my cameras many times where all of a sudden 10, 15 minutes after I'm gone, those deer are right back on the fields.
Gotcha.
And because I don't want them to educate them that it's me climbing out of a tree or walking across the edge of the field or, something like that. So that's one tactic early in the season that I'll use. But getting back to, the rest of the season, then that October, November, I'm really going to get into those funnel areas and watch those deer, especially during midday, because those bucks, what they're going to do is now they're not going to sit down a whole lot, unless they're locked on a doe, which they shouldn't be for another 2-3 weeks, get into that second week in November, the end of the first week, and then they'll start locking up with these does. But the prior 2 weeks, from the 25th of October until that first part of November, hunt those food sources early and late, and then if you hunt all day, move into those funnel stands, into the woods, because those deer, especially now that you know where your bedding areas are going to be or your water sources, and those deer are going to move, those bucks are going to move and check those water sources and check those bedding areas and go on the downwind sides so they can smell and see if anything's bedded in there. If anything's in heat and bedded, so then they can go in there. So I always set up on a food source. I've always got 2 or 3 different stands because of winds. Funnels, I've always got 2 or 3 different stands because of winds. If winds are one way, I want to hunt one side of it. If they're the other, a different side. I have ingress and egress routes to every one of them that's different depending on the wind, because I know where wind is that these deer should be bedded in this area or they should be bedded in this area. So I can't walk past that to get to here or I'm going to blow all those deer out. So I have to figure out a different ingress-egress route from point A to point B to get around those deer. Whether it takes a little longer, it takes a little longer, but I don't want to educate those deer. And that's part of developing that whole plan.
Gotcha.
So you can do that. And so then once you're in there, well, now, what I call early season, I'll get in and I'll start doing some calling right away, for the first week or two of season, social grunts and, just light sparring rattling. Because a lot of the young deer are trying to figure out who's who on the schoolyard. It's first year with antlers. And so they're out there. It's just like your freshman year in high school. You come walking in and you got to look at another freshman and go, you know what? I think I can take that guy. I'm bigger than you. And, I'm going to be the new kid on this schoolyard. And then all of a sudden the senior walks in, and he doesn't do anything but walk up to you and kind of give you that look, and you're like, okay, I understand. I'm just a freshman. It's no different with those deer. When those mature deer hear that real light sparring or those social grunts, it's more of a they just want to come in and check it out. It's a social thing.
Right.
I'm going to come in and see who you are. I'm just going to display my antlers, maybe puff up, walk sideways a little bit, and show you who's boss. And so that technique works pretty well early seasons. And then you get into the rut. Well, like I said, you get into that October 25th, and tactics then completely change. Now you can get into long, drawn-out buck fights, tending grunts, estrus bleats, snort wheezes, which I truly believe that if you do the snort wheeze, it's the only call that I won't do as a blind call. What I mean by that is if I don't see a deer, I won't do a snort wheeze. And the reason is
okay.
It's a dominant call, and if I do that as a dominant buck and I have a 2-year-old deer there or a 1-year-old deer, I'm going to watch that thing get turned inside out. And
right.
He's going to take off and what else is that deer going to spook when it takes off?
Right.
Where if I see that deer, and plus if you do that, those bigger deer, the mature deer, try to get downwind of you. How many of those sneak behind you and you don't even know they're there because they smell you first?
Right.
And they sneak off. This way, if I see that deer, then I can snort wheeze at him and in a direction to make him or try to force him to go on the upwind side of you.
Gotcha.
So, will I rattle and grunt? Yes, I will, because usually they'll all come running to that. Sometimes, especially those older deer, they'll kind of sit out there and stage a little bit and try to figure things out first. That's when you hit them with that snort wheeze.
Gotcha. That makes sense. That makes a lot of sense.
So that is really good during that time frame. And then you get into, that second week in November, depending on where you're at, and you start getting into that lockdown phase. A lot of times, those dominance calls, you're done. They aren't going to work anymore. Why would you, Mother Nature is telling them, we're running out of time. And this, as far as the rut goes, and that always kind of cracks me up every year because, I hear that you get the second week of October, you have a big cold front come through, you see a 1-year-old deer running through the doe or running through a field with a couple of does, and your buddy always sends you a text. Dude, rut's early this year. Man, they're starting. I always send back, no, it's not.
Right.
The rut is always triggered by the day, length of daylight in a 24-hour time frame.
Right.
And so many people don't believe or don't know, I shouldn't say don't believe it, they don't understand that or know that. They think that it's, completely off the moon phase, it's completely off. What the moon phase does is it changes how those deer move throughout that time frame when those days begin to get shorter and shorter. That's what triggers that. That triggers her to come into estrus. That triggers the rut into that buck. And then the moon phase is when that deer is most likely going to move during daylight. The cooler the weather, the more they're going to move during daylight. That's what the weather and the moon has to do with that. However, as far as the rut goes, it's always going to start real similar to the same time. The moon phase will just give you better days to hunt throughout that time frame. So you get into and you get past that, and now you get into their lockdown stages. The dominance, because that is starting to get so short, is they're saying, hey, I'm running out of time here. I don't really want to fight that guy. We already know who's the dominant buck in this area. So
Right.
What do? Now I work on the jealousy factor. So now if I see that buck and I see him chasing a doe and running her, obviously she's not ready yet, or she would already given in if she's not, if I've been watching him for 25 minutes chasing. So I will try to do my estrus bleats with tending grunts.
Okay.
And try to push that button, try to get that jealousy button where he's like, whoa, wait a minute here. I've established that I'm the dominant deer in this area. So who's over here playing with my does? So hopefully you hit that button right and you make him jealous enough that he peels off her long enough to come over and check out and see who you are. So you've got about a week time frame in there that seems to work really, really well.
Gotcha. Okay.
Then you're going to get back into then you get into rifle seasons all over the country where if you don't have a lot of pressure, you can still use some of those tactics as far as the jealousy and stuff goes. But once those gunshots start going off, man, a lot of those big deer, they just kind of disappear and hide. And so then you've got to wait until late season. Once I get into late season, then I go way back to the beginning of the year, because now it's all about social again. Who's the new bucks that got pushed into this area? Which deer made it through the year? And they're all about food. So you hunt food sources, especially when it's super cold. I'll move to those food sources. And that's when I like to use decoys. Early season, during the rut, decoys are a blast. You can either love them or you can hate them. Because if you've got one up, sometimes you'll have that small little buck come in and he'll knock it over. Or, I've seen 1-year-olds and 2-year-olds when I've had does out there as a doe decoy, try to breed it, knock it over. Then you've got to climb down, you're spreading more scent, trying to put it up, different things like that. Where late season, they don't really come in to run it off. It's just more of a social thing where they feel more comfortable seeing deer out there during daylight. And if that deer is being vocal to them, that older, mature deer is going to say, okay, now I feel comfortable. There's something out here already. They're going to come out and join it. And then that's when I go back to the light sparring, and I'll go back to, your social grunts, your doe grunts, different calls like that once you get into that late season time frame.
Gotcha. Okay.
So,
how do you treat scent control?
Well, number one, I always try to play the wind.
Okay.
There's a million things out there that help. Is there something that is absolutely the best out there that's going to say, it takes 100% of my scent away? I don't believe that, but do I believe that there's a lot of things that truly help contain your scent and make it so you are a lot less detectable to get those deer to walk through your scent streams? Yes, but it all begins early. I will start here within the next couple weeks and I don't have a whole lot of hair. I'm pretty much going bald, but
all right.
They say that, all the studies that I've seen over the years, it takes 2 to 3 weeks to get scent out of your hair, okay? So these guys that are going in and just using scent shampoo for one day and say, yeah, I'm good, and they go out hunting. If they've been using some type of fragrance shampoo, it's still going to be in there.
2 to 3 weeks. Okay.
Yep.
Interesting.
So I always
have not heard
start
that yet.
early.
Okay.
Yep. So I always start early, and I will start using that. And my wife hates deer season because she's a big hunter and loves to hunt with me. But trying to find really good shampoos for women with conditioners and stuff is difficult.
Right.
For me, because I don't have a lot of hair, I don't care. I'm like, whatever. I just put it on my head and away we go. But, we start 2 to 3 weeks before season starts, and it's a ritual. I mean, you shower with scent-free soaps, scent-free shampoos. Your clothes are washed and scent-free. They're put in scent-free boxes. So when I get done, and it's time for season, I will shower. I will get in the truck with, shorts, something that does not stink. I have other clothes, blue jeans and other clothes that are washed and scent-free without regular detergents and soaps that are put in a whole nother box. That's what I wear when I'm in a truck. And then once I get to where I'm going, then I'll pretty much strip down my underwear and I will spray myself down with no scent sprays.
Yep.
And then I will put on my clothes over the top of that are scent-free. And I always carry in, I'll put on scent-free deodorant. I'll carry in a bottle of spray, and then I'll spray myself again once I get up into that tree. And make sure my bow is sprayed, make sure my arrows are sprayed, make sure, everything is sprayed because you've been touching that all summer.
Yep.
It's been laying next to the dog kennel. So I'm very scent cautious. I still play the wind, however, because I think you have to. But have I had deer walk straight downwind to me? Yes. But that's because, it's a ritual, taking care of it. It's no different than my trail cameras. Trail cameras, I hear it all the time, and I do a lot of trail camera seminars, is people are always saying, I get one picture of a big deer and then it's gone. I never see it again. Or, they're seeing my flash. They're seeing the IR. They're seeing every single time I hear something new. Every new camera comes out, there's something new.
Right.
And I'm like, guys, no. If the flash is scaring a deer, then the next time there's a thunder and lightning storm and that lightning starts flashing, everybody take cover because the deer are going to go crazy running through houses, in front of cars, everything else. Okay, so no, I don't truly believe that. That does not happen. I've run too many studies on them and watched too many of them to see what happens. I mean, I run 50, 60, 70 plus cameras a year on different leases all over the country. Mm-hmm. And then it was the IR. They're seeing the IR. They're seeing what I've found in all the studies, different things I've done, is I look at it, and it's no different than you and me. If you walked out and your wife came home and put something new on the kitchen table, you walked in there tonight, and you saw that, you'd be like, wonder what that,
Sure.
Wonder what that is over there. That deer, those deer trails, those woods, he knows that like the back of his hand. Those does know it, those bucks know it, because that's where they live. That's their kitchen. That's their living room, okay, their bedroom, whatever you want to call it, and they're in there. So all of a sudden, you walk in on their trail and you put a camera at eye level right in front of them. They're going to notice that.
Of course. Absolutely.
As soon as they start looking at it, if that thing flashes in their face or it clicks or an IR or they see anything, if it has any type of scent associated with it, that's a non-normal scent, they're going to freak out over it. So I truly believe that most of it is our scent that we need to get rid of. So when you first buy a trail camera, you take it out of the package, it stinks. Okay?
Sure it does. It smells like factory.
They're horrible.
Right.
So I will take that, and I will take the straps, and I put them outside in my yard, and I will hose them down, and I will wash them with scent-free soap, and then I will let them sit out there for a week, on and off, through rain, through whatever, and just let them air dry, get wet. And then when that's done, I put them in a scent-free box again. I will take them out. When I put those up, I will wear my gloves, latex gloves or non-latex vinyl gloves, put that camera up, and then I will take field wipes, and I will wipe that camera down as soon as it's up.
Gotcha.
Get rid of all that scent, and then it's the same when I go check them. I always try to put those cameras in areas that I can easily access without putting a lot of my scent out there. I get to that camera, I always take 2 cards, and I'll write on there, cam number 1. And then that way when I get to that, I have 2 cards for it. I'll put a card in it, wipe the camera down, shut it, and I'm gone. I don't want to mess around at that camera. The less scent, the less invasive, the less intrusive, the better, and I'm gone. And I go to the next camera and do the same thing. And, so the quicker you can check those and the quicker you can get out of there, especially try to do it in the middle of the day, better you are.
Gotcha. Okay. Very, very cool. And what other types of equipment are you using in your stand? You hangs out in your backpack, and what weapons are your weapons of choice?
Well, this year I'm shooting the Carbon Defiant, white Carbon Defiant. I like that. I like a carbon bow, and the reason I do is because I like to do a lot of cold weather hunting late season.
Okay.
And carbon doesn't transfer that cold like an aluminum riser does. And so that's why I like that, is just because when it's super cold, that carbon feels better. It's not as freezing cold in my hand. Also, if I'm out, last year we did a high country mountain lion hunt. A couple years ago we did a high country mountain goat hunt. And, so the carbons, they're like, yeah, but it's only a pound. Well, you know what, when you're 10,000 feet and you're pushing 4, 5, 6 miles, when I'm deer hunting though, it's still, that pound makes a difference. And I like that, for those reasons. One, weight, but also so it doesn't transfer that cold into my hand. New archery products, I've been a Spitfire guy forever and ever, as far as a mechanical head. And the new Spitfire Double Cross has just been, had great luck with that. I shoot the full metal jacket. I shoot the small diameters.
Okay.
Just because they're a little bit heavier, the thing is, and a lot of people are like, well, they bend. Well, yeah, they bend. They're full metal jacket. It's an aluminum, it's a carbon arrow wrapped in aluminum. Why? Because they can make it straighter. It's straighter and it's a little stiffer. So it gives you a lot more penetrating power. And so when I'm hunting elk or if I'm hunting big game, I like that. It's super small diameter. There's not a lot of drag on it, but yet it gives you that extra penetration, that drive that you need out of it. And that's why, that arrow's been great. Does it bend? Yes. Can it, not obviously every time, but can it? Sure it can. But you can also break a carbon arrow, and that's what I tell guys. That deer can fall over on a carbon. That deer can snap that off. You can go through that deer and hit a tree and just right and snap it or crack that arrow too. So, right. What do you want to give up here? And it's your choice and my choice because I like that penetration is why I go with that full metal jacket. In cold weather gear, because I like to hunt a lot in the cold, is Arctic Shield clothing. They redesigned everything a couple years ago, and that's been my go-to. The problem is that you have to figure out what to wear because it can actually be too warm.
Okay, right.
I don't think you'd ever say, I don't think I'd ever catch myself saying that,
right.
But it can be too warm. So you have to kind of look at everything, and when you look at it and it says, yeah, this is, from 20 degrees to 40 degrees, they're talking 20 degrees. I mean, it's not, and last year when we were out, it was super cold and everything else up there on the mountain, and I said, we're going to do some walking, so I'm just going to take my bibs, and I tell you what, I started walking, and I'm like, this just isn't going to happen. These things are just way too crazy warm,
Right.
So you kind of have to watch it, but because I like to hunt late season like that, and, they're developing stuff that's lighter and lighter now for that early season 50 to 60 degree stuff, which is super thin, super comfortable, but yet still pretty warm. So that and, I've done my real tree clothing forever and ever since Bill Jordan came out with the original pattern, and I've stuck with it. I've just always liked that pattern, and, as they develop new ones, just seems to switch. The thing is with patterns that a lot of people don't understand is the difference between, they'll buy either green or they'll buy brown. Well, I like both because as a turkey hunter, I like to have that brown early in the year. And as the turkey seasons progress, then I like to get more green involved. The same way in the fall, I like that green earlier in the year and then switching over to brown as things all die off and turn more into fall.
Okay.
So that's why I kind of go with, a couple different patterns is just because of that.
Gotcha.
So, but yeah, other than that, Summit ladder stands. My wife likes to be comfortable. So, we go with the biggest ladder stands, that one person can fit in, and then, we have the hang-on stand for the cameraman, and so it's like I said, I like those because they have they've got a seat built right into them that's separate away from the tree, so you can, if the tree's a little crooked, you can still get that seat pretty much square and sit and be comfortable.
Gotcha. Very cool. Well, I think we've written like a blueprint on how to hunt deer based off all the stuff you just laid down. That's crazy.
I mean, we can, like I said, I love my deer hunting. We could sit here and talk for hours and hours and hours about this. So.
Right. Gotcha. Let's transition into an actual hunt now that you've established all the ways in which you do hunt them and how you prep for them. Let's think of a time in your life where you went on a hunt and it still kind of sticks out in your head today. Is there a hunt in particular that you remember?
There is. It's, there's a million of them out there, but this was kind of a two-part, which was kind of a depressing end of the first part, but got better. My daughter and my wife and I used to hunt North Dakota with a buddy of mine out there, and we were hunting velvet deer.
Nice.
And my wife and my buddy were down at one end, and I really wanted my daughter. She had not shot a deer yet, and we had everything set up out there. We're right along the edge of the river, and a great early season funnel, bunch of apple trees in this area. So we got set up, and we had a few deer coming through, and as the night progressed, I tapped my daughter on the shoulder, and I said, there's a really, really big velvet deer coming down the pipe. I said, so you might want to get things ready. And she goes, okay. And at the time, she was, I believe, only 13 years old. And she had only shot a couple of does and hadn't shot a buck with her bow. And as this deer keeps getting closer, and I'm filming this deer, and I'm looking at it, and I'm thinking, wow, this is a really, really big velvet deer. I'm like, this deer is, a mid-150s, 160 buck. And she's going to get a crack at this thing if things keep, happening. And so this deer comes in and keeps, making his way slowly but surely, and finally gets there. And I'm filming, and I'm watching her. And she knew what to do, even at 13 years old, or 14. She'd been around the woods enough with me over the years, and she started hunting with me. She couldn't hunt, but she started going with me when she was like 5, 6 years old, and just sitting in a tree. So she knew what to do, and I was pretty confident in her. And so I'm kind of watching through the eyepiece and watching her at the same time, and the deer stops, and it stops like 18 yards, puts its leg forward, and I watch her go to full draw, and I'm thinking, okay, this is going to happen. The deer kind of stops, looks around, she squeezes the trigger, and I watch that arrow go, and it goes right, looks like money. Yep. And this deer spins around and takes off, and I am as excited as any dad in the world has ever been, because I'm thinking my daughter just killed 155-inch or better full velvet deer.
Right.
And just absolutely gorgeous. She's excited, I'm excited. So I kind of replay the video, and I'm like, you didn't get a lot of penetration, but it's right behind that shoulder, just as perfect as I think it can be. So I'm going to get your mom out of the tree stand. She's like, you're doing what? I'm like, I'm going to get mom and my buddy Eldon out of the tree stand. So I go over there, and I'm like, guys, Elena just shot a giant velvet deer. You guys need to get down. They're like, okay.
Right.
And so we go out, and we find some blood, and we start looking, and nothing. We can't find this deer. So we go back and watch footage, and we're like, I just don't know if she's got enough penetration. So the next morning we go out and we look. We look for hours, and blood dries up, find part of her arrow, and gone. Never see this deer again.
Yep.
So we're pretty depressed. My wife ends up shooting a pretty nice velvet deer, and we leave and come back to Wisconsin. And I never make it back to North Dakota that year. And so the following year, I'm talking to my buddy again, and I'm like, this year I think Dad and I are going to come out, but I can't make it out until the end of November. And he's, dude, you know what the weather's like out here along the river? I'm like, yeah, I know. I said, we'll be good. And so I sent out some trail cameras, and he's like, I got this really good buck. He's about, 1.5 miles, 2 miles down the river on some public land, off of the land that we usually hunt. And I said, if we can get in there, let's go. That's where he's hanging. So we go out and we hang some stands and get everything set. And mind you, this is an entire year, and while she shot hers, it would have been the first part of September. And so now this is an entire year, end of November, first part of December, we're out there.
Gotcha.
And so we see a couple bucks first night. The second night, I'm in this tree, and Eldon's with me. He's filming, and all of a sudden we're watching down along the creek bed, and it is so cold that we are literally watching the ice on the river that's off the creek bed freeze. And
Yep.
He's like, I don't know how much longer I can take this. And I said, does the camera even work? You wouldn't turn on, camera wouldn't even turn on.
Of course, right. That makes sense.
And I'm like, okay, we're done. I said, we might as well just call it, because this is ridiculous. I said, we're bundled can be. And all of a sudden, we're kind of sitting there, and I look over, and I said, just wait. I said, there's deer coming down through here. And it snowed all morning and stuff, and pretty soon we see a few deer filtering through. And here's this buck we had on camera. And I'm like, here he comes. And he's like, all right. He comes in, and I said, camera? He goes, it's not going to go. And I said, well, I'm going to shoot the deer anyway, because this is a big deer. And I honestly turned my head and looked to the back as I draw my bow, because I'm afraid that it's going to snap. It's that cold. And I draw this thing back, and wow, it didn't blow up. I'm good. And deer steps out. He's like 22 yards. I shoot this deer, and literally as this deer is running, you can watch the blood freezing.
Really?
He runs about, I mean, it's like freezing as it hits the snow. I mean, it's that cold. And this deer runs probably 35, 40 yards, stops, falls over dead.
Wow.
We look at each other and we're like, let's get out of here. So we back up, we bail the bottom of the tree. We get down there, and it is so cold trying to take our gloves and stuff off that basically I gut this deer, we tag this deer, we wrap what we can on this deer because we're so cold by that time that we can't drag it out. I'm like, I'm not dragging it. I'm not going anywhere because it is so cold. And we're like celebrating. It's great. We take off for our walk. And by the time we get to the truck, I mean, we're just freezing. My dad's sitting in the truck. I'm like, how long you been here? He goes, 2.5 hours. He says, I was in the tree for 45 minutes and done. He says, I couldn't do it. He says, I don't know how you guys did it. I said, well, we were leaving, and this deer came in, and I shot it, and blah, blah, blah. And turned on the car, and it was 22 below zero without a wind chill.
Without the wind chill?
And without the wind chill.
Holy
And
smokes.
So he looked on his weather app, and it was like 37 below wind chill. And I'm like, yeah, no wonder we're cold. This is stupid. I'll never do this again in my life. I'm like, we're idiots, this and that, but we're all still pretty excited about this deer. So the next morning, we go back out and grab this deer, do what we have to do for pictures, things like that, take it back to the shop. And my buddy's a taxidermist, so we're stripping, we're taking the cape off, because I'm like, I'm going to do probably a half body on this deer. It's probably the biggest 8-pointer I've ever killed, and like it's got to be a 160-inch 8-pointer. And he's like, yeah, it's going to be close, if not just a little above. And so we're pretty excited about that, and we're skinning this thing, and all of a sudden he goes, well, what is that? I said, what do you mean? He goes, feel this. And so I put my hand up inside the cavity of that deer again behind the shoulder, and there's this huge mass in there. Just like a big tumor almost.
Really?
He's like, well, we got to find out what this is. And I said, yeah. So we cut this thing open, and after we get the cape off stuff, so we're hacking away, and we cut this big mass out of there, cut it open, and here's my daughter's broadhead with 2.5 inches of her arrow inside this deer. And I'm looking at him, and I'm like, huh? He goes, no, that deer got killed last year during rifle season. I said, I put their initials on the ferrules of all these broadheads. I said, we're going to find out real shortly. And once we started to unscrew it, sure enough, her initials were on that ferrule.
Wow.
And he's like, okay, that's probably the craziest thing I've ever seen. Well, as we started looking at this deer, it went in right behind the shoulder, but instead of dropping straight down when it string jumped her, it went to run forward, and that leg, she was so tight behind that shoulder that it actually pushed that arrow, and it looked like it was right. And as it went in, because it was slow enough, it snapped the arrow off and flipped that 2.5 inches of arrow around and laid on the inside of its body cavity instead of getting to the lungs or the heart.
Huh.
And flipped it up tight right against the inside of its rib cage and grew this huge mass all the way around that.
That's
broadhead.
crazy. Wow.
It was. I'd never seen anything, and if I went to seen it, and I went to had Eldon and a couple other guys in the shop when that happened, we probably all would have gone, yeah,
right.
You're full of it, man. And
yeah, they would.
I still have that broadhead. So when I mounted that deer, I actually took that broadhead and incorporated it into that mount.
That's insane.
And,
There's no question. There's no question that had you told that story independent without a witness, you would have been accused of embellishing. There's no question about that. That's crazy.
And it was, it was the craziest thing because, like I said, it was literally a mile or farther from where she had shot that a year and 2 months or a year and 3 months prior to me even going back.
Right.
And shooting that deer, and then to shoot the exact same deer and still have that much of the broadhead in it, and an arrow. It was crazy. And so that was pretty neat. So that was that hunt, just because there were so many downs right away, and then to actually end up with that same deer and bring it home, in the family. And so it's kind of funny because she, when we got the mount back, she comes back and she says, "So my deer looks pretty good, doesn't it, Dad?" Yeah. I said, this is kind of a two for deer here, honey. So it was just kind of neat. And again, that's why that hunt sticks out. I've got a million of them, but that one really kind of sticks out, that how you can shoot a mature deer like that and then a year later go back and it's still alive and have the circumstances that were there happen. So that was kind of neat.
That is fantastic. What a great story, man. That is a memorable deer story. Holy smokes. That's awesome, man. Very cool. Well, let's jump into the 10 rapid fire questions here.
All right.
I didn't prep you for these, so don't be nervous.
No problem.
They're just off the cuff. All right. What's your number one hunting tip of all time?
Ooh, make sure your broadhead, as far as archery hunting, make sure your broadheads are sharp. Working with a broadhead company for years, if they are not super sharp, we used to do what's called a rubber band test.
Okay.
If they wouldn't cut a rubber band, when you run that over, you'll see them roll. That rubber band is like arteries.
Yep.
The sharper that broadhead, the better the blood trail, the better that will, it'll cut, it'll make more damage. So it's not necessarily how big it is. Obviously, the bigger the broadhead and the sharper, the more damage it will do. But a dull broadhead will not create the same blood trails and the same hemorrhage that a sharp one will. So always make sure your broadheads are very sharp.
Gotcha. Very good. Excellent. All right. Number 2. We all have these items that we feel like we need to hunt with. Maybe they're good luck charms. Maybe they're an actual item that you feel like you need to have with you at all times to be successful. And it drives us crazy if we leave it at home or in the truck. What's that one thing for you?
Well, years ago, I really didn't have that one thing. However, now, my wife and I do a lot of work with special needs hunters and handicapped hunters. Mm-hmm. And years ago, we met a little gentleman by the name of Drake Taylor.
Okay.
And Drake Taylor, we hunted for a couple years with Drake, and he passed away. And when he passed away, he used to make jewelry. And I have one of the last necklaces that he ever made himself.
Okay.
That he made for me. And now I do not go hunting in a blind or anywhere else without that part of his necklace.
Gotcha. I can see why you'd want to have that with you.
Yeah, it's just it's pretty cool. I mean, there's a lot of things, but there's just something about that one that now I've got to have that with me.
Right. Gotcha. All right. What's your biggest pet peeve in life?
My biggest pet peeve? Well, there's a lot of them. Poachers drive me crazy. Liars drive me crazy. They're just, it's, I guess, boy, that's probably one of the toughest questions ever. It's my biggest pet peeve.
There can be a lot to that. Some people don't have any. Some people have a lot of them. I have a lot of them.
I guess, truthfully, would be trespassers. And the reason why is, until I owned my own property, I didn't really realize why people got so upset about it. And now I look at it and say, wait a minute here, there's all kinds of public land, there's state lands, there's all these lands. Why are you trespassing on my property? Call and ask permission. More than likely I'm going to say no. But, even to come get a deer, I'm going to say yes. If you shot a deer and it's gone on my property, I'm not going to deny you of that.
Right.
But we pay, so granted, they may not be able to afford land, but that's what they have public lands for, and that's why you ask other people for permission. They look at when you do certain things and grow deer or try to grow big deer, people trespass to get in there to shoot them and do things, and it's like, wait a minute, you don't understand how much money that land costs, the taxes, the hours TSI work, the money into chainsaws, the money into food plots, the money into... So you're spending all this. So I guess people that are trespassing to do that really burns me. Right. Because the landowner has put so much time and dedication and devoted so much into that stay off. Either ask or stay off.
Right.
And a lot of them are afraid that you're going to say no, so they just go in there anyway.
Gotcha.
Well, then they get mad when they get a ticket for trespassing.
That makes sense. There's a lot of energy and money and time and effort spent into all this development.
Right.
And if they want to do that, they need to go find a place to do that too.
Right. And there's a lot of places to do it. There's a lot of public. There's a lot of, there's a lot of places to hunt, and there's a lot of people that will let you still hunt. It's just a matter of asking.
Right. Exactly.
So,
all right.
Yep.
Very good. All right. Number 4. How old are you today?
47.
47 years old. What would you tell the 27-year-old Art, Helen, knowing what you know today?
I guess at 27, I would have been a little more focused on family and what to do, with family. At that point in time of my life, we were working with Ralph and Vicky with the TV show, doing seminars, doing a lot of things. And I remember there was times when I wouldn't even see the inside of my house for, a month.
Right.
And, so today looking at it, some advice that I try to give not only myself, but other people that are younger is, guys and girls, number one, family, your kids grow up very fast. You have time. Make time for your career, but make more time for your family because you only have one of them.
Right.
And I guess that's what I would have told myself is you can continue to grow your career, but you can't get those times back that I missed with my kids, the birthdays, the anniversaries, the soccer games, the different things. It's find time to do that because careers come and go. Your family is all you really have.
Right.
And at the end.
Right.
So, focus more on that and, make your living and do your thing, but try to be the best parent and the best adult that you can be as you move forward through that age. That's probably what I tell myself.
Yep. Yeah, I so agree with that. Art, that is one thing that kind of came through to me about 10 years ago, and it's been the most rewarding development and viewpoint in my life that I think I've ever had.
Yeah.
Yep. All right, let's see. Number 5, you're at a hunting convention somewhere in the world, and a stranger comes up to you and they ask you what you do for a living. What would you tell them?
Ooh. I would say I work in the outdoor industry, outdoor hunting industry. One of the biggest mistakes, and I don't really want to say mistakes, but I'm trying to think of the word here, misunderstandings, is people think that, they see someone on TV or they see me traveling around doing seminars all the time, talking about hunting or on podcasts or doing things that all we do is hunt for a living. I still, like I said, help my dad in the appraisal industry when I have to. Mm-hmm. I have a land management business. I have a photography business. I have, I diversify. I have a seminar business. Hunting, even for the TV show hosts and guys that do that all the time, hunting does not pay your bills. What pays your bills is the seminars, the land management, the speaking engagements, the different things like that. And that's why I say I work in the outdoor industry. Yes, do I get to hunt every single day of the year? Yeah, I'm fortunate that I do. The reason that is because I have to become knowledgeable so that I can bring that information back to seminars and new educational things to get paid for those to be able to go out and hunt. So in a roundabout way, are you getting paid to hunt? I guess you could say yes, but in reality, not really. You're getting paid for, the land management, for the seminars, for the TV appearances, for all that stuff. But that, is what comes from hunting. You have to hunt in order to get that paycheck. Understand what I'm trying to say?
Absolutely. Yep. You can't be the expert without the knowledge. And without
so
that,
right. Yeah. So you can't say that I hunt for a living because you don't. Nobody hunts for a living. They don't pay anybody to sit in a tree stand.
Right.
They pay you for your knowledge to educate people or to entertain people. That's the difference.
Right. Right.
And I think people have a big misunderstanding about that, is that they're getting paid to sit in a tree. No, they're getting paid to be promotional people. We're promoting, the outdoor industry. We're promoting a product. We're promoting different things. That's what pro staff is we're promotional. There is, as far as professional hunters, as far as if they want to call us that, that's fine. However, we're truly promotional hunters is what we are. We promote the entire outdoor industry, and that's what we're getting paid to do, is to promote.
Right. Gotcha.
So,
very good. All right. This one's easy. What did you have for breakfast this morning?
I had a wilderness athlete replacement shake. I'm trying to get ready for the mountains in another week, and so I've been running a wilderness athlete 28-day challenge. And so in the mornings I get up and either I have a lot of protein and eggs, or I will take a replacement shake. And this morning was a replacement shake. So
all right.
That was pretty simple.
All right. Very good. Sounds very healthy. All right. Number 8. If I say the word successful to you, who's the first person that pops into your head and why?
Ooh. That one's tough because I know a lot of, successful individuals. There's actually quite a few people. My dad I look at as successful, but in many different ways, because he was always a good dad. He was a good father. He was, successful in his business. So you look at that as self-employed is very tough business today, and he was successful in it. Again, he was successful as being a role model as a father to not only me, but to my sisters, to my nephews, to my nieces, as a grandfather. And so, there's different ways of being successful, and I think he's very successful, that way. My wife is very successful in her business and her job, and to be able to do the things she does with me and help me become successful. One of the most recent that I think is, very humbling to me and very proud dad moment is my oldest daughter. She recently has moved to India under an internship. She is a environmental engineer getting her master's in civil engineering, but working with water treatment facilities and drawing up new plans for the entire country and large cities in India. To me, that's pretty successful when you're, 23, 24 years old and you're in different countries helping develop new things for countries and for our future, for everybody. That's pretty cool. There's a lot of different levels in that, I guess, as far as success. I have many mentors, in the outdoor industry that I think are very successful. But, I, again, go back to my dad and look at, because I think without him guiding me and doing the certain things he did to help me succeed in life, I wouldn't be able to have been the father I am today to both my daughters, for one who's in UW-Madison trying to become a doctor and another one who's, getting her master's in engineering. So thankfully they got their mother's brains, but, to help do that, so I guess that's what I would look at as dad,
Sure. Yeah, that's a good one. And I have a lot of respect for my father too. Absolutely. All right. Number 9. What's a typical day in your life look like?
Chaos.
Chaos.
Chaos. It all depends on the time of year. At this time of year, as things are, slow in the seminar series and the land management series, I'll get up in the morning and I will do some work on my computer as far as getting stuff to outdoor writers that need to be done, editing photos that needs to be done, getting photos to different magazines and different outlets. Then I'll go to my other office downtown and work with my dad as far as, appraisals if there needs to be any. Then I will come back home and get right back to work on the computer, or I'll go out to the farm and make sure that, food plots are done, make sure that, all my fall work is done, trails are mowed, trees are cut, different things are done out there, hanging tree stands. And then, usually in the evening I'll come home and, have my supper, and then I'll go for a walk somewhere with my wife, and we'll talk about different things of the day. I'll come back home, and usually I'll either go back to work on the computer or do some things, or, sometimes I'll go down and we'll just have some downtime and watch, CSI or Criminal Minds or something on TV and kind of veg for a little while. And
Gotcha.
That's usually what the day is.
Okay. All right. Very good. All right. I'll swing right into number 10. What's a typical deer hunting day in your life look like?
A typical deer hunting day? Ooh. Again, it depends on what time of year. It's, early season that'll be coming up. I'm not one to push early morning hunts right away in the beginning of the year, especially when I'm trying to hunt, 5 and 6 year old deer, because I don't like to, if something goes wrong on those first couple days in the mornings, and I blow them out of those areas, that's not a good deal.
Right.
Not that early in the year. So
Right.
my typical is I'll scout from a distance in the mornings on early season, get in there, hunt the afternoons, and start doing that every day and changing things up. And as the season progresses, my depends on if I have my handicapped hunters in or my special needs hunters in, because if they're in, my day starts an hour to an hour and a half earlier than normal, just trying to get them ready and them into tree stands. Once I get them situated, then I have to go back and reorganize myself and then get to my own stands and hunt. And when that time of year comes, that's my typical day is I'll get up, sometimes at 3:30 in the morning, so I can have them out, and then I can get in my stand, and we will usually sit all morning until late morning on the earlier seasons, and then I will get them, and then we'll get back in, take a little break and get back in the afternoon. Once I get to that mid-October, typical day is sun up to sundown. Whether I'm moving to a funnel in the middle of the day or not, but it's a sun up to sundown hunt, and right back at it the next day.
Gotcha.
And, they can be long, grueling days, but that's, if I want to learn things and educate people, that's what you got to do. And some people say, man, I'd love to be able to do that. And then they go and they do it for 3-4 days straight, and they go, I don't know how you do this every year.
Right. Right.
And I'm like, yeah, let me tell you, I got my days. So, but no, that's typical day as far as deer hunting goes. Just getting all the equipment ready, and the other thing right now is trying to get at least an hour worth of shooting in a day.
Gotcha.
So
very cool. Art, I got to tell you, this has been awesome. We've been talking about a lot of different aspects, and I literally, as I said earlier, I think this is a blueprint for a lot of people on how to do things.
Thank you.
Where can we find more information? Let's pretend like we didn't cover enough material here today, and if people still had questions, where would they go to find more information out about you?
Well, hopefully back on your show again someday. But
right.
No, it's my website would be www.arthelinoutdoors. It's HELIN outdoors.com. If they're into photography work, because I have to separate those because some people aren't into hunting that are into photography, I do have a photography page, which is www.wildreflections.photo.com. And then I've my Facebook pages, which is Art Helin Outdoors and Wild Reflections Photography. The main one as far as hunting and to get a hold of me is obviously the arthelinoutdoors.com or just the Art Helin Outdoors Facebook page.
Gotcha. All right. Very cool, Art. This has been an absolute honor and a pleasure to have you on the show. I've learned a lot, and it was nice to just kind of lay it out as to how somebody might want to go about working on their own piece of property and then how to hunt them, and to find out how you went about it through experience, which is cool that you constantly hone your craft through actual application, not just theory. So this is it's been very eye-opening.
Thank you. Yeah, it's been a pleasure, sir. I appreciate it, and it's been good. And like I said, I think we could sit here and talk for hours about it, and because it's an ever-evolving industry, and that's why you have to do what we have to do and spend as much time as we can, because we have to evolve right with it in order to get better at it. So, like I said, it's been a pleasure. It's been fun, and I really appreciate you having me on the show.
Well, thanks to Art Helin for joining us on the Big Buck Registry Deer Hunting Podcast. I most enjoyed that conversation. I like hunters that share their knowledge and go deep with both their successes and failures, and think deeply about what's going on around them, whether it's habitat, whether it's timberland management. As you heard, Art really enjoys speaking to a good forester, and foresters are, stewards. They're stewards of the land, and that's where the deer are. So get to know your local forester. I think it'll go a long ways. Art certainly found lots of value there, and we really appreciate Art spending as much time as he did with us to share all the things that he's learned. We certainly wish him success with Art Helin Outdoors, and good luck in the deer woods this fall. Dusty, do we have a Chubby Tines tip of the week this week?
Yeah, we do, Jay.
The Chubby Tines tip of the week is sponsored by Morse's Sporting Goods. Firearms, used firearms, bows, used bows, located at 85 Kentucky Falls Road in Hillsborough, New Hampshire. Give Jim a call at 603-464-3444, morsessportinggoods.com. Your dollars go further in New Hampshire. There's no sales tax. Morse's Sporting Goods.
Safety harness time. Get your stuff out. Go through it. Tree stand, climbers, hang on. If you've got a safety harness that has a fray or a little bit of a cut, or maybe you hooked it on a fence, or maybe you hooked it on a part of your tailgate or something, or a bolt sticking out in the barn where you had it, and it's got a fray or a rip in it. Guys, gals, friends of ours, you've got to stop and think, is a $100 safety harness worth your life? Absolutely not. Is a broken, frayed cable on your hang-on tree stand or your climber worth your life? Absolutely not. Take that $100 and get it fixed. Buy you a new harness, or it may be more than $100. Spend the money. Be safe. If you come back with an injury or a wound, you're no longer enjoying your hunt. So just get it fixed, get it right, and be safe out there. There's so much new safety gear out there as far as the lifeline from the ground clear to the seat.
Right.
Everybody's like, oh, that's expensive. Well, it's not really expensive when it comes to your life. I would pay quite a bit to keep my life from having a hunting accident.
Right.
So just, use your head and maybe overlook a couple bags of corn to fix your safety equipment.
Yeah. I think more hunters get hurt every year falling out of a tree stand because they didn't have the proper safety equipment than they do in any other facet of hunting.
Right. Just, it's just a simple visual hands-on look at everything. Put your harness on, look it over, lay it out on the garage floor, or out in the grass, or in your living room, wherever, your basement, and look it over. You don't pull a bow back with a half frayed cable in your face. Why would you hang yourself up in a tree with a frayed safety harness?
Exactly.
You just don't do it. You get it fixed, or get a new one and make it right. And I'm telling you, there's all kinds of Facebook groups out there. I'm going to say something here. Get on Facebook, find a hunting group, and post on there. If you're low on funds, post on there that you need a safety harness. Other hunters will postage you a safety harness that they got laying around, a good one.
Right.
Hunters take care of hunters. There's people out there that'll help you. Get on these groups on Facebook, and find somebody that's got an extra safety harness that maybe been sitting on the shelf for 2 years that they've never worn or opened a package of, and they'll ship it to you. No problem at all. Everybody's happy to help out when it comes to safety. So just, use your head and don't get all excited about going hunting the next morning and you got a bad safety harness. It's not worth it. That deer will be there the next day. Take time and get your safety equipment right, or man, it's not worth going to the woods. That's something that me and Jay, or Jay and myself, cannot stress enough about being safe in the woods.
Right.
We want to hear your story, not a horror story that you fell and broke your neck or your back or your legs or your arms, or we see it every year. Why should this be happening? You gotta wear some kind of safety gear.
Exactly. Yeah, we spent. That was one of the efforts that we focused on when I hunted in Ohio with you, is we made sure we had our safety harness. It's a little awkward, and it certainly bulks up your gear, but it was absolutely essential.
Yeah, you got to have it. And a lot of guys go on these hang-ons, and they're leaving the hang-on out in the woods for all summer, and the weather just eats the cables out of them. Well, what was really good last year could be really weak this year. So take that in consideration. You got to check your gear. Yeah. Just because you think it's good doesn't always mean that it's safe.
Exactly. So, and I would guess that if you needed some stuff, Morse's Sporting Goods would be carrying that over at their place. Last time I was there, they had a whole bunch of it. So if you want to save some money on sales tax, you can buy it in New Hampshire right from Morse's. Listen to the ad and you'll get all the contact information for that. Oh, that's an absolutely great tip, Dusty. It's that time of year. We will all be in tree stands before you know it, and check your equipment before you go out there. Make sure you're safe. Well, that's great, man. Thanks for that tip of the week. That was fantastic. Thank you to Morse's Sporting Goods for sponsoring the Chubby Tines Tip of the Week. I'd also like to say thank you to all of our sponsors. Without them, this show is not possible. And specifically, I'd like to say thank you to Advanced Takedown Tree Stands, Covert Scouting Cameras, the Horny Buck Seed Company, and once again, Morse's Sporting Goods. I truly believe in each and every product that we're advertising on this show. We've tried them all. We've been to the stores. Each and every one are absolutely high quality, high grade products. And if you're shopping for any one of these types of items, please give our sponsors a shot first. Dusty, where can we find you when you're not hanging out here in the studios with me?
Shoot me an email, dusty@bigbuckregistry.com. You can look me up on Instagram and Twitter @ChasingAntler, Facebook.com/Chubby Tines Outdoors. Jay, where can the people reach out to you when you're not on the mic?
Likewise, you can shoot me an email, jay@bigbuckregistry.com, and you can visit us on Facebook, facebook.com/bigbuckregistry. We're also on Twitter, which is twitter.com/bigbuckregistry. We're also on Instagram, instagram.com/bigbuckregistry, and YouTube, which is youtube.com/bigbuckregistry. On YouTube, you can listen to all of our podcasts in their entirety. As far as videos are concerned, it's a boring video, but the audio content is there, so you can actually listen to our podcast. You can also listen to all of our live shows that we've done on Thursday nights when we do them, and we've gone back and re-interviewed a lot of our previous guests we had on the show just to put a face to a voice, let's put it that way. You can always listen to our show on other places as well, not just YouTube. We're found on iTunes, iHeartRadio, TuneIn Radio, Stitcher, and Blueberry. And if you would like to submit a buck to our page for consideration and be featured on our page in front of 250,000 diehard deer hunting fans, all you have to do is go to bigbuckregistry.com/mybuck, and all of the instructions will be right there. I think that's pretty much everywhere we're at. I think that's a wrap, Dusty.
That's a whole lot of big buck, Jay.
Sure is. I'm Jay Scott.
I'm Dusty Phillips.
And this is the Big Buck Registry's Deer Hunting Podcast. We'll see you next week.
Can't wait.